Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jon Mackenzie.
Oh, are you delighted?
Not really.
Yeah.
No, I say that, but
Steve must have written that. Is it on the? It's not even on the.
No, he never writes that. He just writes, "Joining me today, ellipsis."
Joining me today.
The right ellipsis as
he
well.
He loves an ellipsis. Yeah. You know, he does this like you know how old men text. You ever noticed this?
I use ellipsis a lot, actually.
Well, there you go. My point has been proved. Yeah. Also, a recent signing, writes Steve, to the Athletic newsroom, joining us this year for his debut on the Tifo Football podcast. It's Deputy News Editor Dan Kilpatrick.
Hello. Hey.
All right.
Hello. I'll do this. Dan KP.
1.5 claps there. You know, I think you earned it today. I think you earned it.
Thank
Apart
you.
from when your phone went off.
That did stop John mid-flow, didn't it?
That's true, actually. No, maybe bonus
beneficial
points.
for all of us, yeah.
actually, maybe I kind of like it. Yeah. We should introduce that more, Steve. Some kind
Just
of...
a buzzer.
A John buzzer.
And
Yeah.
we're done. Here, let's discuss what we talked about on today's episode. Well, we started the show with our head in the clouds, right, Steve? As a metaphor. I mean, yeah, it is a metaphor, Steve. Our head wasn't literally in the clouds. Also, we talk about some choice quotes from Bruno Fernandes about Manchester United being open to selling him in the summer. We go on to talk about Ruben Amorim finally making tactical changes to his system. Or was it finally as implied by Steve? Or was it always there? I don't know. You know, we talk about that. After a break, we proffer a conversation, writes Steve, about Spurs. What should the expectations be for them? And how disappointed are Spurs fans currently? How much crossover is there also between flying a plane and driving a bus? That's an analogy that's come up before. I wanted to make more of it, but there wasn't the opportunity. So.
You spent most of the time talking about bananas, which...
Did I talk about bananas?
You talked about DNA in bananas and then carbon
right.
life forms, and I felt as though it detracted somewhat from the analogy, which I think works, you know.
Yeah.
Analogies only need to work at a sort of functional level, and you took it...
At a carbon level.
You took it way beyond that.
Where should Spurs spend money in the transfer window? In the winter window. No one ever says winter window, do they?
Right, Steve.
Right, Steve. The January transfer window. And in that section, what unforgivable slur did Dan use that we had to cut out? Incredible. That's actually not what happened, but we did cut something out that Dan said. And also, I feel like I issue this fairly regularly. Sometimes people in the comments, Dan, they get upset that we cut things out. They say, leave it in. Why wouldn't you leave the funny stuff in? They're not funny. There are legal issues, although this today wasn't a legal issue.
No, I mean, we could probably have left it in, couldn't we?
Yeah,
Better
I thought you were a bit of a coward about it, actually, to be honest. You know,
yeah.
I was just, in that moment, I was disappointed with you. And that was the show. I think. Anything else to add? No?
No.
Dan's got to go back. There's news break. I think he's got to go back. So I'm just sort of dragging this out for a second.
He's even got his hands on that.
He's ready to leave.
I do.
What's the news stories? You
I
can't
know
tell
nothing.
us,
I
can you?
just
nothing.
He's
got to
feel
go.
like I should do my actual job.
He wants to leave now. He wants to leave the room now.
Doesn't consider this to be work, which is nice, I think.
No. I mean,
I'm glad we've made an environment where people feel as though they're slacking off when they come in. That's good. That's good work culture.
Well, we're finished, except for this one thing, Dan, that I just have to say. Over the festive period, our last show will come out on Monday, the 22nd of December. That's next Monday. And then we'll return at the beginning of January, Monday, the 5th of January.
That's the biggest something got cut ever, isn't it? So a number of weeks of
That's true. A week and a half got cut.
Mm.
Yeah. All right, Dan. Back to work, eh?
Pleasure. There's actually nothing happening on the news desk.
The Athletics! Where else to begin, of course, than what's been dubbed as the craziest game of the Premier League so far this season. It was Man United 4 Bournemouth. Very strange. I didn't watch this one, but I watched the scores throughout the game, and I was very confused by what was happening. John, we talked about this ahead of time. You kind of pointed out that not only was this relatively interesting game in terms of what it tells us about these teams, but also what it tells us in a broader sense about the direction that the league is going in. So we thought we'd have a bit of that conversation today. Before we do that, though, let's hit on some of the newsier topics that relate to it. Dan, let me come to you first, because there was a news story that came out this week. It was from a Bruno Fernandes interview that was, I think, only aired in Portugal. the video of it. But in the interview, he says that he felt that the club, Manchester United, wanted him to leave in the summer, and that he felt a little bit hurt. What happened? What's he talking about?
Well, I think it was no secret over the summer. I think that United would have been open to maybe a big offer from Saudi Arabia for Bruno, and he mentions that directly. And I think probably they could have got him off the wage bill and got some money for him, and maybe put that toward buying some players that suits this system that Amorim insists on playing.
Right.
So he's obviously unhappy about this. And I mean, look, we all know that there isn't any loyalty in football, is there? I mean, whenever...
Well, there only is from players, I would say.
Yes, I mean that's it. When a club wants you gone, it doesn't really matter, how much service you put in over the previous however many years. They usually try and get rid of you. So I kind of sympathise with what Bruno said. I think he's clearly been the only, in many cases, good thing about United for 5.5 years. Yeah, and probably, depending on what happened, deserved a bit more respect. So he's had a whinge about it in an interview that seems to have been kind of specifically set up so he could have this whinge, oddly, by the Portuguese Football Federation. Yeah, and I totally see his point. Him kind of saying, I could have earned so much more in Saudi, I've got less sympathy with, but should he have been treated better by United? Yes, probably, I think.
Here's one of the things he said. He said, Jason, referring to Jason Wilcox, director of football, said, like Omar Barada, the chief executive, they said, we won't say no. This would be to a big offer from the Saudi Pro League. But obviously, we want you to stay at the club. But if you want to go, we won't say that it's not a good offer for us because it's massive money. So, I think there's maybe a couple of ways of looking at this. One is I think you're absolutely correct, and I feel sympathy towards him as well. I sort of feel a little bit of sympathy towards, in this case, Jason and Omar, because I think they're also doing their job, right? They're thinking, okay, here's a 31-year-old player. He's obviously by far the best player that we have, and so they've said, we don't want you to go. But if you get an offer, John, for, I don't know, tens of millions, and you get, this huge wage bill, these huge wages off your wage bill for a player that presumably particularly based on like his athletic approach to football, in 2 or 3 years probably isn't going to be anywhere near as good as he was before. It's not terrible to think like, maybe this is a good outcome for everyone, particularly when you look at the discourse around a player like Mo Salah this year, or other players who reach the kind of, their epoch, and then I often feel like the biggest mistake these big teams make is getting having contracts that finish around this age, where they then have to make a big decision about renegotiating. You should just have a contract that goes to 32, and then maybe you pay 1 year extra than you need to, but you don't end up in these weird situations.
Well, firstly, can I congratulate you for the most confusing quote I think I've ever heard in the media, which started off with Jason said. So Bruno Fernandes said, Jason said, and also Omar.
And also Omar said, yeah, we won't say no, but obviously we want you to stay at the club. But if you want to go, that's what Jason and Omar said.
I mean, I guess the point is that in football you have these asses that slowly...
These asses, they're all over the place in football, aren't they? Good
all
Lord.
Over the place in football that age out. And like you say, you're sort of almost playing chicken with the end of someone's contract. So if you put someone on a contract to 32, like you said, if Bruno Fernandes at the age of whenever he was when he joined Man United gets a serious injury, then you're paying that up for a while.
I think he was 26.
So I guess you always end up with these sorts of moments of brinkmanship. And I don't know, I find Bruno Fernandes really interesting from that perspective, because this is a topic of conversation that comes up regularly. We've talked about it. We've made videos about it in the past on Tifo IRL.
I think on the past
Tifo IRL,
as though the past were a cloud.
Yeah. In many respects, that's a good way of viewing it. The interesting thing about Bruno Fernandes is he's clearly the most creative player Manchester United have had, as Dan says, for years.
Yes. The gap is maybe somewhat smaller this season because they've brought in Cunha and Mbeumo, but it's still big.
Yeah, and that's why he has earned that respect, right? Because in a period when they didn't have that, he was the guy who was sort of pushing them on their way. The problem with that becomes that when you were so reliant on a player, that player almost shapes the way the team has to play, because you have to play to the profile of your best player. And at times that has looked like having to speed things up, right? And with Bruno Fernandes, his creativity comes from like high volume, just trying a lot of creative stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And I guess as a result, it's sort of forced Manchester United down a very particular tactical pathway. And at times we've kind of raised the question, what does that mean for them? Because it's felt like I think with any team who have ambitions of being title challengers, in the last 10 years or so, the way that you do that is by the opposite of speeding the game up. It's about slowing it down. And I guess when you have your best player playing in the opposite way to the way that everyone else at the top of the game is trying to play, it raises questions about whether or not you might be better served by a slightly less good player in that position, but who fits the play style more. Now, I think we're going to get onto this, I guess, in the next section. But the idea is that football is changing, and now actually Bruno Fernandes is probably looking a lot more useful as a tactical piece in a jigsaw puzzle, in the tactical jigsaw puzzle of life that is modern football. Don't think that really worked.
No.
There's better than a cloud, though, wasn't it?
It's arguable. I'm not sure.
What's your favourite metaphor?
Clouds.
Clouds. Okay, yeah, nice.
I only know one type of cloud, though.
Really?
Yeah. Which one do you think that is?
Cumulus.
It's the cumulonimbus.
Cumulonimbus, because it's like Harry Potter, isn't it?
I don't know.
The cloud.
Cirrus is one. The
Cirrus
cloud.
is your
It's a different type of cloud.
thin and wispy clouds higher up in the atmosphere as cirrus clouds.
Yeah, and cumulonimbus are like big bulbous ones.
Simpsons
Yes.
clouds.
I like that. Yeah, I like the Simpsons clouds. You know, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I've got a balcony now. Yeah, it's pretty impressive stuff, guys. I've got a balcony, and I can see the sky from where I live.
So you've become a cloud fan, have you?
I've become a cloud fan. I'm looking across the horizon thinking, what kind of cloud is that? You know, and then I'm distracted by some chocolate or some such. But for a moment there, I was thinking about clouds. I'm thinking I might get a cloud book, or just.
I suspect there's probably not enough
cloud books,
clouds to fill a book, but maybe.
I think there probably is. Let's find out how many different types of clouds there are.
About 4 or 5, I'd say. Your cirrus, your cumulus nimbus, your cumulus omnibus, which is multiple clouds together.
There's 10. There's 10, Steve.
There you go.
10
main categories, Steve. Twice as many as you thought. Oh, dear. What are they? There's high-level clouds. Yeah. Within that, there's the cirrus, the cirrocumulus, and the cirrostratus.
Could we assign a footballer to each cloud type?
That's a really good idea.
Sort of listicle.
Well, I mean, what would we say that the definition of a high-level cloud type is?
Bruno Fernandes.
What are clouds like above 20,000 meters? Well, according to the AI overview on Google, which we know is always correct, they're a very rare type of cloud called noctilucent clouds. Because they're wispy, as Steve said earlier. So, okay, if you were to name
a wispy
footballer, a very rare wispy. I mean, like maybe a Dimitar Berbatov. You know,
yeah.
I'm thinking sort of lightweight. You know, someone who couldn't quite hack it in the Premier League.
Junior Hoylett,
Brian Hill.
Oh wow, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think you need a high-level wispy player, so you need to go for Mikkel Damsgaard. I think he's like wispy, but also high level.
I guess so.
Yeah, he's wispy.
Yeah. Then there's the mid-level clouds. The alto cumulus, the alto stratus, and the nimbostratus.
There seems to be a common strategy.
What is their characteristic?
Let me look. Sorry, hold on.
They generally go from wispy to fluffier the further down the sky you go.
They're composed of water droplets, super cooled droplets, ice crystals, or greyish. They can appear as greyish sheets. That's quite hard to say. Greyish sheets. That's
so kind of ice cool and grey. I mean, that could be Berbatov.
That could be Berbatov. Although it feels kind of I'm trying to think of a footballer that makes me feel bleak. You know, who makes you feel bleak as a footballer?
Ronaldo.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a mid-level cloud, isn't he? He's certainly not a high-level cloud. We all know that, and that would be upsetting. And then, of course, there's your clouds with vertical growth, your low-level clouds. The cumulonimbus, the thunderstorm clouds, the kind of very, very big, impressive-looking ones. But I guess they're also they pass along quite quickly, don't they?
Roy Keane clouds.
The Roy Keane. No, he had some longevity, didn't he?
Yeah, but he looks like thundercloud.
He does look like a thundercloud.
My favourite cloud is
Edin Dzeko.
Oh, Edin Dzeko, yeah.
I think
he
bounces around a bit.
Burned very brightly, didn't he? Mm.
And for very long. Unlike what's the famous phrase of the light that burns brightest burns half as long, but he has played for a long time.
Right.
My favourite cloud is those mushroom clouds that you get
after a nuclear bomb.
No, not like that.
I mean, that's when you get a mushroom cloud, John.
That's true.
Yeah.
I've worded that badly in hindsight.
Jon Mackenzie, destroyer of worlds. What are the mushroom clouds you're talking about?
Before you get some of these like weather phenomenon that you see, like St. Elmo's fire and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You get these kind of like upside down mushroomy clouds before storms in certain parts of the world.
Yes.
And they look very cool.
Right.
I don't know what they're called though.
Upside down mushroom clouds.
Wasn't St. Elmo's fire about the siege of Malta by the Ottoman Empire against
I think isn't St. Elmo's fire is like a phenomenon that pilots see in the air potentially, but I might be wrong on that.
Oh yeah, I've got them.
What are they called?
These bad boys.
Yeah, that's them.
Yeah.
Do they have a name?
Please, John.
Oh yeah, that's them.
It is also a weather phenomenon in which luminous plasma created by a corona discharge.
Corona discharge?
From a rod-like object such as a mast, spire, chimney, or animal horn.
I think I had that when I got COVID.
A rod-like object like Rod Stewart.
Do you know what's very interesting about this? Usually Steve would be moving us on, but Steve's busy. His head
clouds and weather phenomena, man.
He's completely
St. Elmo's fire looks fun though.
I think they might be called mammatus clouds.
Yeah, I think that's
mammatus clouds.
Right. Yeah. Check it out, listeners.
Oh,
Appearance, bulbous sagging pouches like udders or breasts.
Yes. Pouch-like formations. Hanging from the underside of clouds, often thunderstorms. Yes, I like them.
Pendulous.
Lumpy shapes.
Them as.
A cloud after my own heart. Okay, well, there we go. That was clouds.
So here we go. They're primarily ice. They can stretch for miles and they hold their shape for some time. So a player who's ice cool and holds
their shape.
The shape. Yeah. Who's looked the same?
Surely Declan Rice.
He's too young to. Oh, you're thinking of holding shape in a different manner.
Oh yes, right. not like letting themselves go.
I was thinking, no, just a player that looks exactly the same. Who's the youngest looking oldest player? You know, the sort of.
There's a few of them.
Like Solskjaer. Solskjaer's held his shape remarkably well. He's starting to wear a little bit, but when you're made out of ice.
Speaking of things that are starting to wear a little bit, maybe we should move on.
Yeah, Steve probably cut a while back, I would say.
But we were talking about Bruno Fernandes like impelling Manchester United's tactical identity a little bit.
Well, that's fair. We can rejoin that conversation because what I was going to say before, when you were talking about Bruno Fernandes as a player who, we've had this argument over the last couple of years, could potentially improve the team were he to be replaced because he hasn't quite fit the system. I'm less compelled by that argument this year. I think partly for the reason that you already laid out, which is that the team are playing in a slightly different way, but also just because it is so evident that he is by far the best player still, that it seems to me, the crazy thing about that story that we started the podcast with is that the notion that they would let him go. I think it's not the same as Mo Salah being at Liverpool, where you have numerous incredible world-class footballers. You're at Manchester United. There's only one of them. And if you let him go, you're just far worse than you were before, like regardless of the system. Yeah. I think so. If I were him, I'd also probably be a bit hurt.
I heard the other day from someone, I haven't fact-checked this, so it might be wrong, but he's got 7 assists this season and only one of them is from open play.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
I mean, yes. Because of corners and free
kicks.
Yeah,
in part it's because Manchester United have got much better at set pieces, but it also surprised me a little bit that he had that few open play set pieces, given the way that they play now, which is essentially trying to play quite direct into runners. Yeah, and he's
probably the pre-assister, isn't he? A lot of the time.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, I wonder. Well, anyway, you mentioned there that there's maybe like a slight tactical evolution, not just at Manchester United, but in the league, that's changing the relevance of Bruno Fernandes. The big talk around this, or ahead of time around this game, was a story that I think was broken by Laurie Whitwell of The Athletic, who said that there'd been a conversation in the dressing room the week prior. Amorim had said to the players, a big change is coming, which made me think of that Wayne Rooney Diablo advert. Do you remember that one? They say a new Red Devil is arriving. Remember that? So people were watching the team this weekend with renewed interest in the system. And lots of people did seem to notice that at times they appeared as a 4-3-3, times they appeared as a 4-4-2. Kees van Hemmen of the Devils in the Details podcast sort of pointed out that this isn't new and they've been doing this for not only this season but last season as well. But it felt like there were some new elements.
Yeah, it felt as though, particularly in the first half, there was more of an effort to get Amad Diallo as essentially just as a winger, and then shuffling the back remaining four back around him behind him, so it felt a little bit more like a four in possession.
With like Lenny Yoro at right back almost.
It was weird though, right? Because it almost felt as though they could have shifted it. They could have used Yoro as a centre back and used Dallo as the right back player, and then had Luke Shaw as the left back. So you'd then have two centre backs and then two full backs.
Sure.
Whereas it ended up being like two centre backs sort of squeezed across and then two full backs on the other side.
Yeah.
But I think it was definitely. I think it was more of a concerted effort to do that. I mean, I do find this conversation a little bit tedious because the fact of the matter is that Manchester United was still roughly playing with a back five out of possession. To be honest, formations are almost only useful these days when we're talking about out of possession shapes, and even then they're becoming less useful.
Yeah.
But essentially what's happening is that they're finding a way of getting one of their players from the back line defensively forward when they're in possession of the ball, so that essentially the back five just became a back four and they pushed Amad Diallo up, which I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both, but they do this anyway. And they do this all the time, right? Yeah. They do it out of possession as well, where sometimes when you're pressing, because so much of the modern game is about man-to-man contact, then you're just going to end up mirroring the shape of what the opponent is doing, and vice versa in possession. Often if you're looking for space, then you have to get your players into the areas where the space is, and I guess the telephone number formations are just a sort of mental way of being able to think of how everyone's going to roughly fit on the pitch. But what I thought was most interesting about this, we're talking about structure, right? With the formations, this was a game that was just completely not about structure at all, right? It was 4-4. It was two teams who have Manchester United this season, but Bournemouth ever since Iraola arrived. The whole premise of them tactically from a top-down point of view is to stop opponents from being able to form structured setups, because when you can form structured setups, it's easier to control the game. Both of those teams at the moment, I think, are putting a real emphasis on trying to destabilize games and remove control.
Yeah.
For Manchester United, that works because if you can make the game sort of more end-to-end, they've got a team stacked with players who are great at playing end-to-end football. The same is sort of true for Bournemouth, but I guess from the point of view of when you have a squad like they do, which is not to the level of the Manchester United squad, it's more advantageous for them to try and stop the big teams playing the way that they want to play, so sort of pulling them down to their level a little bit. What we got was the sort of mixture of those two things, and the result was a very, very chaotic game. Manchester United actually almost felt more like Bournemouth at times. So they did the standard Bournemouth thing of just dominating the first 20 minutes, coming out with incredible intensity. Bournemouth couldn't quite sort their press out, and so Manchester United generated a chunk of their chances.
Like 2.5 XG in the first half, right?
Yeah. I don't know if it was quite that much, but it was a big chunk of XG in the first 20 minutes even, where they were just able to get these direct attacks, where, when they get the ball moving at speed, big spaces open out because Bournemouth have an aggressive man-to-man press, and if you miss your access to the players, you do leave these spaces open, and Manchester United feasted. And
I think it was that much in the first half.
Really?
Yeah, I checked at half time because I didn't watch the game, so I just watched the XG instead.
It was a lot. I don't know if it was as high as 2.
Yeah, it was 2.5. Yeah,
in the first half.
At the end of the first half.
Okay,
it was 2.5. It was 2.5.
I believe you.
Should we check live? Do you want to gamble on who's right here? Do you think is it me or John? I sound very confident. Dan.
I'm backing John.
You're backing John?
Yeah.
I mean, it's his debut appearance.
In the first half, it was 2.37. So
come on, that's 2.5.
I'll give you the win.
That's 2.5 right there.
Right.
Oh man, how about? See, there you go. I mean, 2.5 XG in the first half, incredible. Would you say they were incredible in the game, John?
No, I mean, I think when it comes to playing in this way, that as we've said, like the players that they have in the team, when you've got Mbeumo, you've got Cunha as well. You've got players like Bruno Fernandes who are really good at moving the ball quickly in those moments so that you can make the most of the space that's opened out.
Yeah,
they looked absolutely dominant for particularly the first 20 minutes. I think from that point onwards, obviously the intensity had to drop, and when the intensity dropped and the game became a little bit more controlled, then Bournemouth came back into it a little bit more. But the game still retained its sort of open qualities. Whether or not the conversation needs to go towards like is this the way that football is heading is another matter, because I think this is probably too far in the other direction, too far away from control. And the reality is that despite the fact that both teams did want to destabilise the game, they didn't want to destabilise it too far. And I think Bournemouth were aware of the fact that if they made it a bit more of a controlled game, it was going to be in their favour. And I think that's the reality of where we're at in football now. That it's very much teams below the top, maybe not even below the top. This idea that teams who are underdogs are now very happy, almost playing in this destabilizing way, just being like, we're not going to necessarily try and do our thing. We're going to try and stop the opponent doing their thing, and then hope that the way that it comes out in the wash is beneficial to us.
It's great listening to Jon, because I think that's a new way of looking at formations, and the amount of column inches that must have been expended on, Amorim's insistence on playing the back three or back five, however you want to look at it, and the amount of questions from newspaper hacks like I previously was, and people in the room about, are you going to change, or are you going to tweak this and that? And probably, as you say, it's a pretty reductive way of looking at it. It makes me almost think that this is the job of someone like Wilcox or even Barada, to sit down with people off the record or on the record and try and emphasise that actually United are trying to disrupt the game, and this is the way we're trying to play, and it's less about the way the players are lined up in the pitch. But of course, clubs, it's one of my big frustrations in football, clubs just don't communicate well enough, and people at those levels just don't talk to people like us. And you get this misunderstanding where people are hyper focused on the formation and the way the players are kind of laid out from 1 to 11. Having said that, though, I do think
here comes the newspaper.
Exactly. I do think, like, I'm sort of torn on this Laurie story, which I'm sure is bang on and really well sourced. That Amorim,
I think Laurie's a dickhead as well. He's rubbish, isn't he? Rubbish. I agree with you.
I'm kind of torn on this idea that Amorim's kind of said a big change is coming, because, like, the time to do that, if indeed that's what he did, was so clearly like at some point last season, right?
Sure.
Like not after they've just spent a lot of money and he started another season playing seemingly a pretty similar way. So part of me is like, okay, fair play, you have finally bent. But the other part of me is like, no, you've come this far. You've just got to stick to guns now. You've either got to go down in a blaze of back three glory, or you should have changed months and months ago.
I think the thing for me is what that makes this so funny is that for me there has been a massive change. Like the team are playing a completely different way to the way they were playing last season. They still used a back five, and I understand like the formation.
But the team sheet doesn't look different. That's the main thing.
And I understand why journalists would jump onto that and be like, you're playing a way that doesn't seem to be working. And every week we're looking at the team sheet and it's the same, right?
Hacks, Jon, please, not journalists.
Sorry, I was trying to be nice.
But I guess in a very kind of basic way, he is still putting 5 defensive players. I mean,
exactly. There's still
Diallo can go either way, I guess.
3 centre backs ish on the pitch, right? That's
exactly. So that is still a fact that is indisputable, and he doesn't have to do that. He could put 2 centre backs on.
He doesn't have to do that. So. Well, let's use them as we're going to have a break in a moment, Steve. But before we do, I'm curious. We've got Dan here who obviously covered Spurs for a long, long time, and one of the funniest and most boring games of all time, I guess, but mainly of last season, was the Europa League final between Spurs and Manchester United, which Spurs won, came out the victor, although it probably doesn't feel that way now to Ange Postecoglou. They were teams that kind of had a similar fate last season. Both finished very low down in the Premier League. Both huge underperformers. If you were to, dispassionately look at both of them now this season, and if I were to ask you the question, who do you think has improved the most or has the brightest, nearest future in front of them? Would it be Man United now instead of Spurs?
That's a great question. Yeah, it would be United, I think. I'd much rather watch a United game at the moment than watch a Spurs game.
Right.
That's for sure.
That's an indictment, really.
Not just because United are capable of these really entertaining matches as we saw on Monday night, but just because Spurs, I think, have just been so dire to watch.
Maybe a difference of success in the transfer window as well, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're in a supposedly new era at Tottenham now, and we don't know whether they got the kind of spending power that United showed in the summer. They're certainly claiming that they want to have or want to do that, but I believe it when I see it. But yeah, and United went out and spent 65 million euros each on 3 really smart Premier League proven in 2 cases attacking players. Mm-hmm. So that is obviously going to make a difference. But yeah, I certainly think if you look back on that game, it wasn't the kind of springboard that Spurs hoped it would be. And it's United who are probably in a marginally better place.
Yeah. Okay.
In part, though, is that not just because Manchester United have been able to play without Europe, right? I think that simplifies things a lot. The thing that I'm really interested in about Manchester United is that a lot of people talk about this period now as being almost like a stopgap period where, and it feels to me like what happened last season is Amorim tried to play a certain way, didn't really work out. He was coming under pressure, and so what they've done is they've moved into this more direct way of playing with incredible intensity, which they can do because they don't have Europe. The question for me, I suppose, in the future is how what's the ceiling of this kind of approach? Because if they get they're going to get European football next season. They may well get Champions League football next season. What do you do next season when suddenly you're like, okay, we can't play this with this intensity the whole time? We've seen they still have those control issues when they try and do things with the ball. Yeah. It's not as I don't think it's enough for them to in the summer or maybe even in January to start bringing in other players and be like, well, we'll bring in a controlling midfielder and that will sort our problems. Because, like you say, they've just spent £65 million on 3 forwards who thrive in this more chaotic environment, right? You can't spend £200 million on a stopgap solution. It has to sort of become a bit more than that,
It's
right?
more than a stepping stone, isn't it? And we've talked about this before, and I promise we'll have a break in a minute, Steve. He really wants us to go to the break. But we've talked about this before, that I think the best, for narrative purposes, the best comparison for Manchester United today is Liverpool between the 80s and Jurgen Klopp. And they went on this very, very long, winding path where they were up and down and, better or worse. But I do feel as though there's a kind of traceable path there. Personally, I think Manchester United have hit their lowest already and are now kind of potentially bouncing back up. Last season was the lowest. Yeah, I mean, definitely it was by league finishing position. It was, but also I think just by general mood. Like the end of the Eric Ten Hag era. It was like I think it seemed as though the fans absolutely hated it. And now what you have is a team. It reminds me of the Liverpool teams of like the early mid 2000s, where they weren't necessarily good enough to completely dominate the Premier League on a regular basis, but they were good enough to occasionally get some results in Europe or to beat anyone on their day, and to they were good enough to attract these very, very established, proven Premier League players. I feel as though that's where we're heading with Manchester United, and I don't think that means that you need to set out your stall as a coach today to play a way that can enable you to win the Premier League, because that's evidently not the aim, right? The aim is to become a regular Champions League team again. I think you can do that but by being more chaotic. Maybe you can't win the Premier League that way. I just don't know if today is the time to ask the question that you're asking.
Yeah, maybe. I do think it's a stroke of genius by Amorim to get the bar so low that like whatever he's done would have been viewed as...
I've taken that approach with my marriage. And my wife's very happy now. Let's have an advertisement break. All right, let's talk about Spurs now.
Oh, do you want to say back from the break or something like that?
Yeah, do you want me to do that?
Actually,
it doesn't really matter,
I'm not sure we actually need it. So carry on, as you were.
Back from the break, Steve's asked me to say that. We're back from the break.
Joe, we didn't need that. I don't know why you...
We didn't need that, Steve?
No.
But listeners, just in case you were unsure...
There was a break, right?
This is no longer an advert. Or is it? If you're interested in a better night's sleep, you could...
Something.
No, I'm not going to cut. I had an opinion, but I'm not going to say it.
No. Yeah. Well, that's wise, Dan.
Yeah.
We're back from the break. Oh, look at that. Well, I hope you enjoyed that advertisement break. Can't do that either, can we? Christ alive. I'm sorry, Dan. I'm on holiday at the moment. I'm only here for the podcast. I've lost all of my professional vigor. Here we go. One last time. The break is now concluded, and we have returned. This is now the main programming of today. where we talk about Spurs, which we've done. I've got something in my eye. We've done it a few times this season already. You'll be unsurprised to hear, Dan, because they are shit. And it's funny. I think it's quite funny to watch them be terrible on a daily basis. Although it's not funny to watch them, is it? That's actually one of the issues.
It's not fun.
No, it's not fun. It's maybe to watch them. We thought today we would kind of zoom out a bit and talk about Spurs. More in the bigger picture. Talk about the macro strategy, right, Steve? To gain a sense of how Tottenham should be judged based on what's happened so far this season. And also, I mean, we had included here when we wrote the plan earlier in the week, if that judgment should lead to another managerial change
for the Lily Whites.
For the Lily Whites, right, Steve? But it is worth saying that on Monday, Jack Pitt-Brooke worked on a story, which actually you worked on as well, relating to Thomas Frank being given the backing of the Spurs hierarchy. Should we just start there to outline what's happened before we go on to have a conversation about it?
Yeah, so I can't take any real credit for the story. It was Jack's story.
You sourced it all. It was, and Jack put his name on it, right?
Yeah, I had to protect my strong sources. So
another dickhead from the Athletic. Let me tell you, that guy, Christ alive.
So, in a nutshell, Frank has the backing of the Lewis family, who no one really knows who they are, but they are. It's not Joe Lewis. We have to stress that he's got nothing to do with the club anymore. He's certainly not the owner. He's pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's his family, and they back Frank. They want to give Frank time, but there have, we understand, been kind of everyday internal discussions, the type that presumably happen at most clubs, about Frank's position. We are told, or Jack is told, that these are not kind of they're not kind of extraordinary meetings relating to results. They're just kind of the usual meetings that you would have at boardroom level in the course of things. So effectively, Spurs want to give Frank time because the people that really matter now in this post-Daniel Levy era are the Lewis family, namely Vivian and Charles Lewis and Nick Butcher, I think is the way you pronounce it, who's Vivian's son-in-law.
Right. Okay. Well, okay. So assuming then that Thomas Frank is safe for the time being, which I think was probably a fair assumption anyway, just because I don't know who they would have to replace him. I think that's kind of that was the biggest stumbling block in my mind to getting rid of him at this stage. It would have felt a little bit knee-jerk anyway, and things obviously aren't going that well, but they haven't been going well at Spurs for some time. We're still this side of Christmas, and it's not like Antonio Conte or a Conte type is out there waiting in the wings to take over. So I think that was the biggest obstruction. But let's, if we zoom all the way out to just what we think the expectations should even be for Spurs. Because that's the thing that confuses me the most and trips me up the most. We just talked about Manchester United, talked about the possibility that they'll finish in the Champions League positions this season, which makes what happened last year feel a bit more like an anomaly. With Spurs, I suppose the question is it an anomaly? Or how anomalous is it? What should we be expecting? Because it doesn't seem as though it's top six.
Yeah. Well, I think it's obviously true that no club in the Premier League now, in this ultra-competitive Premier League, has an inherent right to be in the top 4 or top 6 or even top 8 because it's that strong a league. But having said that, I think Spurs clearly do have all the building blocks in place to be a club that should be challenging at the top end of the table. They have possibly the best training ground in the country. They have surely the best stadium in the country, if not Europe, maybe the world. They have a hyper-engaged fan base. They have revenue streams that are not related to on-pitch performance, that are kind of consistent. And they actually have some really good players. The squad needs a lot of work, but they've got Van der Ven, they've got Romero, they've got Kulusevski, and some others, and some really promising young players. So they've
got an imaginary cheese room as well.
Precisely, they've got a microbrewery, they've got a go-kart track.
Incredible.
They've got a lot of things that other clubs don't have.
You can walk over the top of the stadium, just like you can walk over the first team as well. I've
done that.
You done that?
Yeah, twice in fact. They have a lot of the blocks in place, and perhaps most importantly of all, they have very rich owners. It has not seemed that way for the best part of a quarter of a century when Daniel Levy was running the club, but the guy who owns ENIC, Joe Lewis, who owns Spurs, who own the majority stake in Spurs, is a billionaire. So they do potentially have the means to be an extremely competitive club at the top end of the Premier League. Again, that no club has a kind of God-given inherent right to be there. And Spurs have made bad decisions pretty consistently for, I would say, the best part of a decade now.
Name 3.
Well, failing to sign any players for Pochettino in summer 2018.
That's a bad one.
Immediately springs to mind.
Yeah.
Not appointing another progressive coach when they sacked Pochettino and pivoting to the win now strategy of Mourinho, Nuno and Conte. And I don't know, any number of poor signings.
Sure.
Or
with the Gareth Bale money. Is that one of them?
The Magnificent Seven.
I love some of those in the 7 there.
Yeah.
Eric Lamela was great fun.
Ericsson was the only real success. But yes, that could easily be one. I mean, you could go... The interesting thing about Spurs over the last 25 years is you'll speak to fans, and every fan will have a kind of different grievance of the Levy era. Some fans will say, I'm still annoyed about, I think, January 2012 when it was Saha and Nelson on the free when Harry Redknapp's side were pushing for the title. So that could be one. Could Spurs have won the league if they'd signed more ambitiously that month? So they've been run really poorly, certainly since Pochettino's appointment. They squandered an incredibly good team.
Which feels like worth just pausing on that for 1 second, because it almost feels as though now Daniel Levy has gone, it's sort of okay to say this. Not to say that it was because of him that no one said this before. I don't mean it in that way. I just mean that Daniel Levy had this kind of brand. He had incredible PR, which suggested that he ran Tottenham as an incredibly tight ship, where somehow his transfer dealings or his transfer activity, his approach to it was kind of a class above other teams. That might result in not signing any players sometimes, but it also meant that they would get more money for players they sold, or they would bring players in more cheaply and would unearth these great deals. So it's almost weird to sit here and hear you say you think they've been run badly because of that.
I think over the last, really since 2019, people have felt more emboldened to say this has been a shambles, particularly given that Spurs were part of the Super League 6.
Yeah.
And that was obviously a horrendous decision, and the way it was executed was also horrendous. So that gave people more kind of oomph, I think, to criticise Levy. But yeah, you're right. There was a kind of myth around him, wasn't there? He was this fantastic negotiator and he always won deals. And in some respects, I think that was one of the many problems of the way he ran the club. He always wanted to come out of negotiations feeling like he had won.
Yes.
That was the impression I got. And that's not I think he thought that the way the big clubs acted was you went into a negotiation, you came out feeling like the winner.
Yeah.
And you came out feeling like you've got a big deal. But that's not really how Manchester City, for example, they've gone in and said, how much do you want for so-and-so?
Yeah.
In May or start of June. And the club has said, this is how much we want. And they said, okay, here you go.
Yeah.
And we'll get them in for the start of pre-season. And that's never the way Spurs operated.
Sometimes winning a deal is ending up with the player, right? And I think that's where maybe Spurs fell down a little bit.
Yes.
It's a really good point. Yeah. I really like that.
What's interesting about this as well, though, is that with Levy going, I guess that a lot of the fans are at a point where they're wanting to see how much of that was actually him and how much of it was the Lewis family themselves, right? Because it almost feels as though Levy was like a really convenient buffer. So anything that went wrong, you could sort of foist off onto him.
Yeah. It's like your parents.
Now he's gone. There's no buffer between the Lewis family and the fan base, right? So however the club decide to proceed from this point forward, I guess it's kind of on them. And on top of that, we just don't really know what it's going to look like, the way that they run the club at this point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Levy as a buffer thing is interesting because we saw at the Fulham game a couple of weeks ago at home, the fans booing and jeering Vicario. And I think that was a direct consequence of Levy not being there. Because if Spurs go 2-0 down after 8 minutes against Fulham and Levy's still the chairman, that is the cue for most of the stadium to chant, "We want Levy out."
Yeah.
But there's no lightning rod anymore because no one knows who the Lewis family are. No one's going to chant, "We want Viv Lewis out," or
right.
Vinay Venkatesham, get out of our club.
Sure.
And you can't really do that with owners anyway, right? It's kind of like they own the club, and it's like you can't really ask them to be out, right?
Man United did it for a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so they've lost this lightning rod. But you're absolutely right. Like, we don't really know to what extent the Lewises were pulling the strings behind the scenes when Levy was there. He gave the impression that for 25 years it felt like Levy was the owner and in supreme control, and he almost ran the club like a family business.
Yeah.
But the lesson of his sacking was that he wasn't really in control and never was. When
it was almost weird, wasn't it?
It was
when
bizarre.
It happened. Yeah.
When they decided they'd had enough of him, he was gone, and there's not much he could do about it. Clearly, so we don't know whether they had said to him, "You run the club in the way that you deem fit, and we will support you from behind the scenes," or whether they were saying, "You need to keep the wage budget 43% of turnover, and you need to prioritise getting the top four over winning trophies," because that was seemingly the approach that he was taking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's go back to expectations then. If you had to put I'll be kind and say a range of finishing positions on it, what do you think, looking at the Spurs team at the beginning of the season, their expectation would be fair to be from fans? Would it be, anywhere between 5 and 8?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Or is that too high?
I think at the moment, I talked about the club earlier, saying they had all the building blocks. I think the club can have loftier ambitions than that. But I think if you actually look at the squad on paper, particularly given that Maddison and Kulusevski are long-term injuries, then you probably are looking at 5. It would be a great season for them, I think, with the front three they've got at the moment, but somewhere between 5th and maybe 9th.
Okay.
And that's probably realistic, and Spurs fans probably have to expect that. That said, I know we're going to come on to Frank, but I do think Spurs could be a lot better than they've looked this season. Yeah,
I was going to ask, do you think that means that they're currently underperforming?
They're obviously underperforming.
Yeah.
You guys all know better than me. John might know this, but I think in terms of XG, they're overperforming. The league table doesn't lie, etc. But I do think Spurs' position's a bit false at the moment. They could quite easily be lower.
Yeah, and they're currently 11th, which is quite low anyway.
Yes, exactly. They could be even worse off than that.
That's the scary thing, really, isn't it? That they've lost quite a few games recently. They've performed very poorly recently, but at the beginning of the season, they won a bunch in a row, and I think earned more points than they looked good for. So this 11th is, as you say, it's like still almost alive where they are, where they could be.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I suppose, John, the scary thing here would be, if we think, okay, Thomas Frank has the backing of the ownership and the executives for now. January's coming up, so maybe we can talk about this in a minute. Maybe there'll be opportunities to bring players into it to refresh the squad. But I guess the main question then becomes, what does incremental improvement, if that's going to be what we see, hopefully, what does it actually look like under Thomas Frank? Because that's still sort of unclear a number of months into the job, isn't it?
Yeah. The timeline of the season was funny, right? Because we got this very, very quickly settled into this narrative of, well, Thomas Frank is going to sort out the defence because the defence was shambolic under Ange Postecoglou, so that needs to be sorted out first. And then once that's done, then you can start worrying about making everything else better, which I suppose sort of worked because Spurs did start out quite strongly. Like they definitely overperformed their numbers at the beginning, and it sort of gave everyone the license to make those kind of narratives. But I guess the reality seems to be that actually, if you look at a lot of the underlying numbers, and if you watch the games, it's pretty clear that Spurs are bad, albeit in a different way to the way they were bad under Postecoglou by the end. But there's still issues there, and ironically enough, I still think a lot of those issues are as defensive as they were before. It's just a different kind of problem. So, in many respects, I guess we've been following this narrative arc where we're like, oh no, you got to give this guy time. He's basically taken over a club that's very different from the previous club that he's had. So he needs to settle into that. And there's arguments to be made that that's the case. And Mikel Arteta has certainly added a level and a layer to the discourse that actually, if you stick with a manager for a long time, it can go well. So I think everyone has that at the back of their minds, because it's happened to one coach, therefore it potentially could happen to every coach. And we saw that with Erik ten Hag. There was those arguments were being made by some of the fan bases there.
Yeah,
but
I watched a clip of our friend Nathan on his Spurs Extra Inch podcast, where he said that he thought Arteta had done irreparable damage to fan bases all around the country in terms of that expectation that the manager's going to come good after 3 seasons. But he is a real example of that, and maybe Spurs will be Thomas Frank will be the same.
It's true. I think my response in these situations is always like, just because outliers exist doesn't mean they should be expected to be commonplace.
You say that about me and my performance here at work, don't you, regularly as well? That's why we've not been able to replicate me.
Exactly. We sit here in the shadow of you, Joe.
Yeah, that's true. And not just because of my physical size.
And it's unfair, because the expectation should be that we produce the scintillating content that you produced in years, and we can't do it.
You can't do it.
But that's okay.
I've had to learn that as well, to be fair to me.
It's been hard for you as well.
It's very hard. On a daily basis, it's hard for me. Imagine waking up and looking around and thinking, I'm the best person here. It's depressing.
It's true.
We've got Dan today, though, so I'm feeling okay about it.
Yeah, that's good. But for me, I think that it's all well and good to talk about like outliers in that respect, and the Mikel Arteta, clubs should learn the lesson from Mikel Arteta that if there's signs of progress and growth, maybe, I mean, the thing that people don't mention with Arteta, well, I guess they do, but like the one of the big things with Arteta is that a lot of the difficult years happened in the run up to COVID and over COVID, right? Which was almost like an outlier event that allowed this to happen and to go on for so long.
He also won the trophy, and I feel as though while there were definitely a lot of dour times, there were, as you point out, there were those signs that this could turn into something. Yeah,
I think so. I think that there were Arsenal fans out there who said there's something worth committing to in this project. Yeah. Also, I went back recently and watched some of the first season games from Arteta, and you look at the squad and the players that they're working with, and you're like, well, of course, the manager shouldn't be expected to do better with this squad. I think the squad that Arteta started out with was worse than this Spurs squad. Arsenal spent a lot of money, but that's the nature of elite football. So I guess my pushback to that would be, well, if we watch the games and you watch it with the tactical eye, there's no sense that what we're seeing is the potential.
A notification, a second in the week, John.
Yeah, I heard there was lots of notifications.
There was. Someone else was saying something important on Monday, and then there was a notification. Incredible. Oh, he's never coming back on, is he?
Alternatively, maybe that's just saved people from me talking.
That's true. I'd already stopped listening, to be honest. No, what you were getting to your point, I think.
Well,
you were thrusting towards the conclusion.
I was threatening towards an actual point, I don't see any signs from Frank that he is making the kinds of tactical steps forward that you might want to see to believe that there is something in this project. Right. Now, again, as I said, he's formerly been managing Brentford, where what is at stake tactically is very different from what's at stake for a team like Spurs. But
what does that mean?
In the sense that I think we've talked about this before, and I've used the analogy of like transport, that people seem to think that being a coach is just the same, and some coaches have better players to work with than others, but essentially their job is exactly the same. But
what's the transport part of that analogy?
Well, the transport part of the analogy is that it's almost like saying, well, this guy's really good at driving a bus, therefore we should put him in a plane and he'll be fine, right? And I think that's for me, that's the difference. The same sort of difference we're talking about when we're talking about taking a manager from a lower table club and putting them in a club where the expectations are higher.
Right.
Obviously, there's lots of crossover between flying a plane and driving a bus, I guess. In the sense that
like a banana and a human share 99% of DNA.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
No, as in like if you I suppose in principle, if you're okay at like maneuvering and manipulating one big vehicle, like, in theory, you could be good at doing the same thing.
Yeah, they're both made of carbon. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
My cousin is a pilot and is also an excellent driver.
He's a bus pilot.
Right, but
yes.
I didn't know they called them that.
No,
Steve.
not Airbus, Boeings.
Amazing.
But I guess the difference is that Thomas Frank at the moment is playing football as though he's coaching Brentford.
Yeah.
And that means that they are, they're solid in some games, and they'll, against weaker opponents, like we've seen in the Champions League, he's been able to get okay results. But I guess the point is that when you have better players, when you're entrusted with better players, you need to get a better rate of return on those players. And the reason why coaches like Arteta and Pep Guardiola are given very expensive players to work with is because they know how to get more out of those players, such that it makes sense for the owners to entrust their investment to them, right? And that's, for me, that's the big question with Thomas Frank. Is he, maybe he will go away from Spurs if he leaves and join another club of a similar level, and will have learned the lessons from this to be able to do it again.
Maybe.
But I think the big question is, like, will he ever make that step up? And it's hard to know. It's why, for me, it's massively risky to take a coach from a lower table club and put them in a top level club without having a stepping stone route to there. So yeah, maybe it'll work out for Frank, but I think it's not just because an outlier exists doesn't mean that he's going to be an outlier. And also, I think there's still signs from these outliers that they're going to be an outlier. Then it's not just fling any coach in and hope for the best. I still think you need to have some kind of sensible approach to whether or not you think they're going to make that step up.
Well, I suppose if they're not going to change the manager, then the other thing they can change in January is the squad. The only player I am aware of that might be moving anywhere is Antoine Semenyo, just because we know that he has a release clause. We know that all these big Premier League teams are interested in him. We've talked about him as a possible addition to Spurs squad before. Although the interesting thing, I think, when you look at the Spurs squad is that injuries aside, which is a big problem, there are actually quite a lot of players for most positions. So if you were to look at the squad and think, where could the immediate best possible upgrade come in January? Where is that on the pitch?
I think it is Semenyo. I think the front three is probably not at the level Spurs need for the ambitions of the club that we've touched on. Certainly, while Solanke, Maddison and Kulusevski are injured, that's the case.
Sure.
If they come back, it remains to be seen kind of in what state they all come back, certainly for the latter part of this season. But Spurs need a game changer. I always feel like most top clubs have their best player in kind of one of the wide forward areas. Yeah. That seems to generally be the case. And Kudus, I think, is a good player. I think he's got some flaws. I think he could be a very good player. Yeah. But I think Semenyo would be a game changer for Spurs in the final third. It would be a real show of ambition if they just went out and met his release clause in the first 2 weeks of January, whatever it is. Yeah. Again, I'll believe it when I see it. The noises from the new ownership are that they want to be more ambitious, and the kind of vibe they're giving off is, it was Daniel Levy holding back the club, and we want more wins, and we want what the fans want. So, how does
it work with release clauses like that? Because the Athletic has reported that multiple big Premier League teams are interested in Semenyo. If Spurs, try and trigger the release clause, but also, I don't know, two of the other top four try as well, does it just become a player choice or a wages issue? I think so,
yeah. And I think the way these things normally work is that
they don't choose Spurs.
Yeah. That's exactly how these things normally work. Got it. There will have been conversations behind the scenes already. And I'm not suggesting for a minute anyone's tapping anyone up or anything, but you don't bid for a player, release clause or not, if you're not convinced that player is likely to join your club.
You don't ask someone out if you think they're going to say no, because that's
precisely, unless of course you're Spurs and Gibbs White and Eze, then you just make yourself.
And you wear
stupid.
Your heart on your sleeve.
Yeah. So I think if they, if Semenyo's saying, I'm up for joining Spurs, then and they think they're in pole position, then they might meet with the release clause. If they think he'd rather go to Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, which is my hunch, I don't know which, but probably one of those three, then Spurs will probably quietly brief and sort of pretend they were never interested in him.
We weren't interested anyway. What do you think, John, when you look at that squad? Because when it needs upgrading everywhere, sometimes it's hard to know where to start.
Yeah, I do think there's needs for that squad to be upgraded. But I think a big part of the reason why it's so difficult for Spurs, and we could have talked about this in the manager section as well, is that it does feel as though we're at a bit of a crossroads when it comes to the way that the tactical history is heading.
Yeah.
It's hard to. We're sort of living through the moment, right? We had what happened to City last season. Similar sort of thing has happened to Liverpool this season. Both of those teams won the league the season before they had this sort of breakdown, and it feels as though the way that the tactical landscape is heading is, as we talked about with the Manchester United game, is away from possession control and towards opponents are now so good at stopping you from being able to control the ball well with possession that you have to be able to have lots of different ways of playing. You probably have to be able to play a little bit more directly anyway. You probably can't enjoy the same amount of possession that you've had. And this poses a problem, right? We've talked about how Manchester United were like, fine, you can't beat them, join them. And they're now playing this more direct form of football. I think the same problem is there for Spurs, because they've made a very definite decision to move in a certain tactical direction with Frank at a point in time where it feels as though, maybe the meta is heading in a different direction. And I think the same is true with players. The reason why Antoine Semenyo is so popular, not just because he's got this reported £65 million release clause, but he's like the perfect example of a modern winger, right? It used to be the case that when you're playing possession control football, the elite sides, they want to have generally wide touchline hugging wingers, wide wingers who stretch the opposition back line, and when they receive the ball, they sort of become an outlet where they can dribble, they can go at their opposition fullback and go either way, try and get these cutbacks or back post crosses. It's a very different type of player to actually what Semenyo really is, because you need to be a very good tight space player and dribbler. He is good in those sorts of situations, but he's best when he's got a lot of space to attack. And now that opponents are being much more aggressive with their pressing to try and stop opponents from having possession control, the spaces have moved now. So the tight spaces are now around the front of the opposition press. That opens out space behind the press. So we're seeing wingers now being used more narrowly. So City, the great example of that, where you've got Doku and then maybe even just playing someone like Shirky or Foden or Silva as a narrower player in those central spaces, so that you work the ball through the aggressive press as quickly as you can to get it into those spaces to then run. Semenyo he's a cheat code player in those scenarios. His ability to carry the ball, keep the ball close to him, and hold off opponent pressure when he's running at speed makes him super dangerous in those scenarios. So he's going to be hot property amongst elite sides where in the past I don't think he would have been.
There isn't a team, I don't think, in the top 5 that wouldn't be better with him. Right?
Yeah, and you add to that the fact that we've just said a big reason for this shift happening is because teams are pressing higher up the pitch. He's good at pressing up higher at the pitch. So we talk about someone like Jeremy Doku. Jeremy Doku is a fantastic player on the ball. Off the ball, he offers much less. With Semenyo, you get someone who offers something on the ball, but also the ability to be actually really elite in your front line of the press as well.
But what kind of cloud is he? That's the real question, isn't it?
That's true.
You know,
I've run out of cloud ideas.
Right. Fair enough.
What were they called? Mammalus.
Mammalus, yeah.
Well, we'll call him a Mammalus.
He's a Mammalus cloud.
But I think that's really interesting. So for Spurs, do Spurs go for, because if they go for Semenyo on one side and then Kudus on the other, that's a very kind of modern front three, right? That's two players who are very good in terms of those open spaces and attacking.
I like the sound of it.
Yeah. So maybe that's the direction they go in. But as we've said, the issue is that Semenyo is going to be popular to all of the other teams around them. Semenyo might be a player that Spurs could have got 5 years ago, and your Cities and your Arsenals might just be like, fine, we'll let you have that player. But now they want those kind of profiles as well, and I think that's going to make it harder for them too. And just to tie up this thought with we're talking about managers, the same with Frank is if you get rid of Frank, what do you do? Because we don't really know where the tactical trajectory is heading.
Harry Redknapp.
Bring Harry Redknapp in for a season. But I think that's the difficulty, is that we now don't really know who the next good coaches are, because it's almost like the evolution has happened ahead of the evolution of the coaches coming through. The coaches who are going to be first-time senior coaches now around Europe will have been doing most of their training qualification work through a system that is still set on the old ideas.
Right.
So I think it'll probably take a little bit of a while for us to start catching up with actually who are the new coaches coming through.
Okay. Now, last question on this, on Spurs before we end, Dan. As a ex-newspaper hack, self-described, if you had to predict what the kind of 3 main narratives around Spurs will be for the rest of the season, what do you think they would be?
Ooh.
And maybe one of them is just
question.
like the uncertain future of Thomas Frank, right? That's probably not going to go away.
That's clearly one.
Yeah.
I think a big narrative is going to be this idea of results against performances and kind of where does the line go, basically. There's a big narrative at the moment that I've seen everywhere that Frank is kind of trying to rebuild the culture from which I don't really buy. I think there is a culture at Spurs. It's kind of embodied by the fan base, and there's lots of people at the club that know what Spurs are about. So I suspect it's going to be Frank's future, the style of play, and then probably looking ahead to January, kind of what are the new owners going to do? Are they going to be more ambitious than Levy was? Are they going to make a couple of signings, but only kind of seemingly under duress on deadline day, which is pretty much how the club operated previously? Or are they going to be much more ambitious and look at Semenyo and others in the first couple of weeks and try and strengthen the squad and, I guess, back the manager?
Great. Well, DKP. Does anyone ever call you DKP?
Yeah, a lot, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a shame. Normally when I ask that, people haven't. Does anyone ever call you... can't say that one. Thanks, Dan.
Pleasure.
John?
Yeah, thanks.
Steve?
Thank you.
Can I proffer one last opinion?
Yes, please.
I don't actually have anything. I just
You
remembered
need to
we'd
get the
forgotten
word
to say
proffer.
proffer.